Hello, listener. I am glad you found your way back here. Put the day down. You don't need it anymore tonight. Come closer to the fire. There is a story waiting, somewhere quiet enough to finally sleep. And if the story kept you company tonight, there is a chair here for you whenever you want to come back. Subscribe only if you feel it was worth the climb. No obligation. The fire will be kept either way. Somewhere tonight, a lantern is burning for you. The first thing you should know about this room is that everything in it is screaming. And none of it is in pain. There is a flower to my left, near the glass, the size of a dinner plate. Pale petals, faintly pink, curled back from a face, an actual face, pressed into the center of the bloom where the seeds should be. Mouth open, eyes wide, caught in the middle of a cry that makes no sound. It has been screaming like that silently since before I sat down. It will go on screaming long after I leave. It is not suffering. It is not afraid. It is simply doing the one thing it was grown to do, which is to hold a single feeling perfectly still, forever, so that no one has to carry that feeling alone again. There is a vine to my right that ends in a mouth full of teeth. There is a thing the size of a dog crouched in the bed beneath the eastern glass, grey-skinned, watching me with one slow eye. There are translucent pods hanging from the copper struts, and inside each one, if you look, and I would not look too long, there is a small dark shape moving. I am sitting in the middle of all of it with a cup of tea in my hand, and I am completely calm. That is the part that should bother you. Not the flowers. Me. I want you to understand the room before I tell you anything else, because the room is the story. Everything you can see in this glass house was grown by a single person. Not bought, not gathered. Grown deliberately from nothing by a girl who could hear what every living thing in the world truly wanted underneath whatever it pretended to want, and who learned eventually to grow those true things into shapes you could hold. The screaming flower is someone's love, with the fear pulled out of it and given a face of its own. The vine with teeth is someone's grief, the kind that protects you by frightening everything else away. Every monster in this room is more honest than the person it came from. That is not a figure of speech. That is the most literal sentence I will say tonight. And the girl who grew them all is gone. 11 years gone. No one knows where. No one knows why exactly, though I am going to try to tell you. And the garden she left behind has been kept alive every single day of those 11 years by the oldest living thing I have ever met, who is, tonight, for the first time in longer than I can remember, awake. He is awake right now. That is how I know something is wrong, or ending, or both. I have known him for 20 years, and in those 20 years I have seen his eyes open perhaps 4 times. He sleeps the way mountains sleep, for seasons, for rains, for the rise and fall of small kingdoms in the valley below. When he is awake, it is because something needs to be done that cannot be done asleep. Tonight he is awake because he is going to sleep again very soon, the long kind, the kind that lasts years. And before he does, there is a story he needs to put down somewhere safe. He has chosen me to put it down in. I should tell you where here is. I found the shell this afternoon in the last gold of the day, the way you find anything that is too large to recognize at first, slowly, and then all at once. I had been following the ridge road south, and the valley below me had been changing for an hour in a way I could not name, the light going strange, the air taking on the particular heaviness of air near something vast and breathing. I thought it was a hill. The great green curve of it, rising out of the moss valley, trees growing along its ridges, a thin stream running off one edge into the fern far below. And then the hill lifted its head. The tortoise is so large that even now, sitting inside the glass house that stands on the highest part of his shell, I cannot see most of him. Through the curved glass, I can see the slow columns of his legs, moss-furred, wider than old trees, as he shifts his weight in the dying light. I can see the lower edge of his shell, cracked and ancient and green with a century of growth. The rest of him rises up beyond the top of the dome, out of sight, into the sunset. A head somewhere up there the size of a cottage, turning slowly toward the last of the sun. The sun is going down behind him as I write this. The sky through the glass is the color of a struck coal, magenta bleeding to orange bleeding to a deep bruised violet at the edges. The clouds piled up like the towers of a city that was never built, and the last light coming through low and gold, and turning every monstrous, screaming, tender plant in this room to bronze. It is, I think, the most beautiful place I have ever been afraid to relax in. I climbed up through the deep moss as the light was going. By the time I reached the glass house door, the sun was on the horizon, and the lantern inside had brightened against the coming dark. A paper Wandian lantern, hung from the top of the copper dome, burning the same warm amber it has burned every time I have ever come here. Through the glass I could see the round wooden table, specific use, and the garden, his garden, her garden, pressed up against every pane. I had not been here in 11 years. I opened the door. I sat down in the chair that was not the empty one. There was tea already on the table, dark in a plain clay cup, still warm, as if it had been poured for someone expected. I picked it up, and as I lifted it, something in the tea moved, a tiny dark shape, no bigger than a fly that broke the surface and leapt, and hung for a moment in the gold light above the cup, and then dropped back into the dark liquid and was gone. I did not flinch. That is the thing. A year ago I would have dropped the cup. Tonight I just watched it leap and watched it fall and took a sip and set the cup down and waited. Somewhere above me, out of sight, the great head turned, and the warmth came down through the glass, the particular warmth I have spent 20 years learning to read. That is not heat and is not words, but is unmistakably him. And what it said, as clearly as he has ever said anything to me, was, "You came back." I said, "You're awake." The warmth deepened. The garden stirred, all of it at once, every screaming flower and toothed vine and slow grey thing leaning very slightly toward the center of the room, the way a crowd leans toward a fire. "I am awake," he said, "because I am about to sleep for a long time, and there is something I need you to carry while I am under." I looked at the empty chair, at the screaming flower, at the small dark shapes turning in their pods. I said, "Tell me about her." He was quiet for a while. He is always quiet for a while. His silences are not empty. They are the sound of something very old deciding exactly how much of the truth a smaller, faster creature can hold without dropping it. Then the light shifted, the sun slipping lower, the gold going to amber, the first violet of evening pooling in the corners of the dome, and he began. I will tell it to you the way he gave it to me, imperfectly. Some of it I was handed whole. Some I built from the shape of his silences. Some of it I may have wrong, and where I am unsure I will say so. But I will tell it slowly, because the light is going slowly, and because he is still awake, I can feel it, the great patient warmth of him above the glass, and because the tea is still warm, and the screaming flower is still screaming, and we have all night. Her name in the small tight letters in the margin of my chart, where I keep the things too important to write large, is Sable. She arrived before the Glasshouse did. That is the first thing to understand. The dome, the copper frame, the garden, all of that came later. In the beginning there was only the shell, and the valley, and him, resting in the moss the way he had been resting, off and on, since before the valley had a name. He found her at the base of the shell, in the grey hour before a spring dawn, not crying loudly, not in the raw way of something abandoned in panic, but quietly and steadily, as if she had been crying for some time, and had already made her peace with the fact that it would continue. She was wrapped in dark cloth. She was not cold. The moss near the shell runs warm, from something in the shell itself he never bothered to explain. She was simply there, in the way certain things simply are when the world has decided they should be. He looked at her for a long time. He was not a creature of impulse. He had watched whole civilizations rise and argue and fall in less time than he took to cross a valley. He did not hurry. He considered. What he considered was this. The valley had been quiet for a long time. Not empty. The moss and the canopies and the evening insects were all there, but quiet in the sense that nothing nearby had spoken to him in years. Not because there was nothing to say, because nothing nearby had yet learned how. He lowered his head to the moss. The infant looked up at him, and he told me this himself in that slow warmth, and I believe it cost him something to admit. She was not afraid. Everything was afraid the first time it saw his full size. She looked at him with the complete, unbothered attention of something so new to the world it had not yet been taught what it was supposed to fear. He decided to keep her. He built the glasshouse after, slowly, the way he built everything, gathering glass from the ruins at the valley's eastern edge and copper from the dry highland riverbed. It took him 4 years to make something she could live in safely. In those 4 years, she slept in the curve of his neck, in the warmth between his head and his shell, and grew the way very young things grow, faster than he remembered was possible, as if making up for a debt. By the time the glasshouse was finished, she could walk, and she had invented 3 words that were not words in any tongue he knew, sounds for warmth, for food, for the specific shape of him in the dark. He learned them. He used them back. It was, he told me, the fastest he had ever learned anything in a life longer than most languages. Now, the first gift. Pay attention here, because everything that follows grows out of this. She was 3 when she stopped one morning on the path to the lower moss fields and would not go on and could not say why. He waited. She shook her head. They turned back. 3 days later, a hunting party from the highland came through that same path and found, nesting in the lower fields, something large and territorial that had been there most of a season. Nobody was hurt. By every account, it was a near thing. He said nothing to her about it. She never asked. She simply, the next morning, took a different path and walked it with the ease of someone who had always known it was the better road. He began to watch what she avoided, and what he found over years was a pattern too consistent to be luck. She never once walked toward a thing that wished her harm. Not because she was careful, she was reckless, the way a child is reckless in a valley full of things that could swallow her, but because she always knew before she arrived what was waiting at the end of a path, what it wanted, whether what it wanted and what she needed could share the same air. She called it at 10, a hunch, a warmth, she said, like the heat of a fire you feel around a corner before you can see the flame, the heat that tells your body something is burning before your eyes can confirm it. Every living thing gave off that warmth. Every living thing wanted something, and the true want, the one underneath the want a person showed you, the one they carried before they ever learned to disguise it, reached her like heat through a wall. She spent her whole childhood learning to stand close to that heat without flinching. The only warmth she never had to brace against was his. And then, one evening, the first plant grew. And I need you to look now at the flower by the glass, the screaming one, the one with the face. because that is where this part of the story has been standing in the room with us the entire time. She had been to the market village 2 ridges over for the first time. The first time he had taken her anywhere with other people. She had stood in the square and let the warmth of 100 strangers wash over her, and most of it she could bear. But she had watched one woman kneel and kiss her child's forehead, and the child's warmth toward the mother had been clean, total, without performance, and beneath the mother's warmth toward the child, so far beneath that the woman herself did not know it was there. Sable had felt a terror so precise it made her step back as if struck. The terror was this, that one day the child would stop needing her. She said nothing. She walked back to the shell in silence and sat down in the moss. And by the next morning a flower had grown where she sat, pale, faintly pink, a plate-wide bloom with a face pressed into its center, mouth open, caught in a cry that made no sound. The fear of a mother she had met once, pulled out into the open air and given a shape, so that the mother would never again have to carry it alone and unspoken. She looked at it for a long time. As she said, "I didn't mean to." He said, "I know." As she said, "Should I pull it out?" He said, "No." She touched one petal very gently. Whatever the flower gave back to her about its own making, whatever it showed her, she never told him. She only nodded slowly, the way you nod when you have been handed something you will be thinking about for the rest of your life. It is still here. It has been screaming silently, tenderly, for 30 years. It is the oldest thing in the garden after the tortoise himself, and every monstrous, beautiful, impossible plant pressed against this glass tonight is its descendant. She began to grow things on purpose after that. Methodically. She never used seeds. She used knowledge of what a feeling was, of what it was trying to become, of the gap between the two, and she grew the gap closed. I should tell you about the two she is known for, because they are the reason the world came looking, and the reason the world is poorer now that she is gone. The first is the one they call the forget-me-not, a small blue knotted vine that flowers only in full dark, in the hours between midnight and first light. What it does is difficult to say without sounding like I am exaggerating. So I will say it plainly and let you decide. It unlocks a memory that is not yours. Not a dream, not a story. The exact, lived, sensory weight of a moment that belonged to someone in your blood. The temperature of their morning, the heft of a tool in their hand, the slant of light through a window they once stood at, and you never will. A fisherman who drank the tea she made from it spent 3 hours, he told her after, hauling nets on a coast he had never seen, with hands twice the size of his own, in the particular cold of a northern sea in the weeks before the ice broke. His great-grandfather's hands, his great-grandfather's morning. He wept, not from grief, he said, but from recognition, the way you weep when you finally understand the shape of something you have felt your whole life and never been able to name. The catch is this: you do not get to choose the memory. The plant gives you whatever your blood holds closest to the surface. And what sits closest to the surface in most bloodlines is not skill, and it is not joy. It is grief. The unhealed grief of the generation directly above you, pressed into you before you were old enough to know you were being handed it. She knew this. She tested every single person before she gave it to them, listened to their warmth, weighed what their blood was carrying, made certain they were strong enough to meet it. She never gave it to anyone who was not ready. She could only test one person at a time. The work was slow. She never once let it be otherwise. She said to him once, "The trouble is not the plant. The trouble is that most people come wanting the memory of skill, and they receive the memory of sorrow, and they are not always the same person afterward." He asked what happened to the ones who were not the same person afterward. As she thought about it, then she said, "They become more honest." He did not know then whether that was a comfort or a warning. I am telling you now so that you will hear it land later in a room with 14 chairs. The second plant they call the connect, a deep red root that smells of iron and pine. I know this one more directly because I have seen what the weak market version does to hunters even now. For 6 hours, a man moves with a precision that is not training and is not skill, but something from much further down. The layer the civilized mind spends its whole life learning to keep quiet. Her original was not weak. She built it over 3 years, and it frightened even her, because the forget-me-not opened the past, and the connect opened the animal. And the animal does not keep the careful little distinctions the mind installs between the people it loves and the things it fears. The first hunter she gave it to had been tracking a creature for 11 months. He had lost 2 of his party to it. She listened to him and found his want simple and clean, to end a danger and go home. She gave him the root. He ended an 11-month hunt before sundown. He came back 3 days later and sat outside the glass without speaking for a long time, and then he asked her, "What was I for those 6 hours?" She said, "Honest." He thought about it, and then he asked for more, and she said no. The second hunter she read less carefully. Not carelessly, she still listened, but the want she heard was need to protect, and what she did not hear because it sat one layer too deep even for her, was need to be the one who decides who gets protected. She gave him the route. They found him 6 hours later at the edge of the Highland camp, standing at the tree line looking inward. The camp had scattered. 2 people hurt, neither badly, and only because someone had had the presence of mind to move everyone away from him in the first hour, when he had begun, quietly, to sort the people he loved into threats and not threats. He could not explain it afterward. He remembered every minute. He simply could not lay the man who made those choices alongside the man he believed himself to be. She spent the next year refining, and by the end of it, she had found the change in the soil, in the dark, in something she did with her hands and never wrote down and never explained even to him, that let the root wake the animal's gifts without waking the animal's arithmetic. After that, a hunter could become extraordinary without becoming a danger to the people beside him. The cost of that safety was that she had to listen to every recipient for 2 full weeks before she handed it over. She could only listen to one person at a time. He asked her once why she did not simply teach someone else to do the listening, so the long list of waiting people could move faster. She looked at him with that particular look, the one she wore when she was about to say something she had already turned over from every side and found, regrettably, to be true. She said, "Because I am the only one who knows when I am wrong." A gift like hers does not stay secret, not because she told anyone, she told no one, but because the world can feel the shape of a thing that works, the way you can feel a warm room through a closed door. The first of them came in the autumn of her 23rd year. She knew before they crested the ridge. Not by sight or sound, they were careful, the way people are careful when they want a thing badly and have decided not to look like they want it, but by the warmth that reached her 1.5 miles down the road. The unmistakable warmth of people who have decided a resource exists and have begun, politely, the work of acquiring it. As she told him, he said, "Shall we move?" As she said no. He asked why. She said, "Running tells them there's something here worth taking. I'd rather see what they think they're coming for." She met them at the base of the shell, 3 of them, lowland administrators by the cut of their coats, from the authority that ran the trade roads. They were warm in the performed way. They had heard of her work. They held it in the highest regard. They wished only to discuss possibilities, collaboration reach, the scaling of what she had built into something the wider region might enjoy. She listened to them for 40 minutes. She gave them a watered-down tea brewed from old, weak, 3rd-generation seeds She kept for exactly this kind of visitor, and told them it was the true thing, and watched a faint flush of sentiment rise in one of the three and get cleared away with a cough. She told them she would think about it. They left. She climbed up to the glass, sat in her chair, looked at the lantern a long while and said, "They want the connect for armies. They don't want to grow the garden. They want to stop needing to train soldiers." He asked how certain she was. She said, "Certain enough that I gave them the echo and not the thing. If I'd given them the real one, they'd have come back with a different sort of group." He asked what she would do if they came back with a different sort of group anyway. She watched the lantern for a long time. Then she said, "Then I'll have learned something important about what they are." The second came the following spring, Merchant Guild men, easier to read, because what the merchant wants sits near the surface. They wanted the forget-me-not, exclusive trade, a handsome share. They had drawings. They spoke a long time about reach and potential and bringing her work to the people who needed it most. Beneath all of it, she heard one thing, flat and bottomless: hunger with no flaw. She gave them the weak tea, gave them nothing real. They came back twice more, and each time she gave them a little less, and each time they left believing the deal had moved an inch closer. She found it, she told him, not funny exactly, but clarifying. "Every time they come back," she said, "I learn a little more about what they'll do. They think they're negotiating with me. I'm auditing them." He asked what the audit had turned up. She said that the market for a real thing is smaller than the market for a thing that only feels real, and that the people who run the second market have no interest at all in the first one existing. He said nothing because she was right, and he had known she was right for longer than she had been alive, and saying so would not have helped her. The third faction he will not speak of. Even tonight, awake, vast, the last light long gone and the dome dark but for the lantern, when I press toward them the warmth changes, not to cold, to something more careful, something that has decided not to hand me all of it. I know only this. They came 3 days after she left. They came from a direction that is not on my chart, from the part I have only ever been able to mark here, something old, and have never gotten close enough to draw. They did not come with gift cloth and rehearsed speeches. They moved through the valley in a different way. He watched them pass on the road below the shell. He did not move. He did not let himself be seen. They did not look up. He does not know whether they found her. He has not known for 11 years. That is the one thing in this whole story I can feel costs him something. Not her leaving, the not knowing where she went and who was walking the same road 3 days behind. The feast did not begin as a feast. It began as a meeting. 14 regional lords gathered to settle a border dispute that had been throwing off small wars for the better part of a decade. 7 of them held trade routes. 4 held water. 3 held nothing but the men they could put on a road if they chose. The meeting was set for 3 days. She was not invited. She was not there in any capacity anyone recorded. What she was, on the second evening, was a cook in the estate kitchen, a post she had taken 2 weeks earlier, when the staff was being hired, because a woman who could brew an extraordinary warming tea from a plain clay pot is a thing no estate kitchen turns away. She had walked into that kitchen with 3 weeks of preparation, a satchel, and the full-strength versions of both plants. He did not know until she was already gone. She had not told him because she could hear his intent toward the plan before she had finished forming it, and his intent would have been to talk her out of it. So she told him she was going south for supplies, and she went south, and she did what she did. I have heard 3 accounts of that second evening. They disagree on the details. They agree on the shape. The tea was served between the second day and the third, a warming tea from a recommended cook in the estate's own cups from a plain clay pot. 14 lords, 14 cups, full strength. What the forget-me-not gave them was not their ancestors' grief. It was their own, the particular sorrow each of them had been carrying for years or decades and had not looked at directly, because to look at it directly would have made it very hard to keep doing what men in rooms like that one do. And beneath the grief, what the connect gave them was the animal's clarity, the power to see exactly what is in front of you, with none of the careful performance of not seeing. For 6 hours, 14 people in a room saw one another, not the positions, not the routes and the water and the men on the road. Themselves, what they truly were, under the thing each had agreed to be for the purposes of the meeting. Some of what they saw was kinder than they had feared, and most of it was not. She waited outside the estate until the 6 hours were spent, and then she walked south without going back in. She did not need to watch. She had already heard the intent of every man in that room. She knew, before the tea was poured, what each of them would give up, and what each would keep, and what the room would do with the difference. The border was settled the next morning. Agreements were reached that had been impossible the day before. Certain lords left early and gave no reason. The small wars along the road stopped within the season. The town that 3 of those 14 had been quietly planning to burn 1 month later as a demonstration was never burned. It is still standing tonight. People are asleep in it right now who do not know they were ever a line item. He told me that part the careful way. He tells me things that hold more than one truth at once. And then he told me the other part. 4 of the 14 lost something in those 6 hours that did not come back. Not their health, not their safety. Something in the structure of how they had held themselves together, the load-bearing wall that had let them do what they did in rooms like that. Something in it shifted, and the shift was permanent, and the things they had been able to do became, afterward, beyond them. She had known it would. She had heard their intent before she poured. She had known, to the man, what the 6 hours would cost each of them. She poured it anyway. He gave me all of this without judgment, without condemnation, as a true account of what the world is, handed over as completely as he could manage. I sat with it a long time. Then I said, "She chose who paid." The warmth neither agreed nor denied. It sat with me the way he sits with hard things, present, patient, offering no relief. I did not ask whether it was right. I do not think that question has an answer that fits inside a room. It was somewhere around here that I noticed the tea had gone cold. I had been drinking it without thinking, refilling the cup twice from the pot, and only now, setting it down, did I notice I had not tasted it consciously in some time. I had only been calm, calmer than the road ever leaves me, sitting easily with things I would normally have stood up and walked away from. I looked at the cup, at the small dark shapes still turning slowly in the last of the dark liquid. One of them broke the surface, leapt, hung a moment in the lantern light, and dropped back. And the warmth came down through the dark glass, brief, and something close to gentle, and I understood. I said, "She made the tea." "Yes." I said, "What does it show?" "What is already there," he said, "not what is hidden, what is already visible in a person if someone sits still long enough to look." I sat with that. Then I said, "That's either a comfort or an accusation." "Yes," he said. I did not ask which. I looked at the lantern instead, burning steady in the dark above the table, and I held the cold cup in both hands, and I stayed very still, and I let whatever was already in me be there, without standing up and walking away from it. It was not entirely pleasant. It was also not entirely unwelcome. And the small things went on turning in the tea, showing me to myself in the only language they had. She came back to the Glasshouse after the feast. Not the next day, 3 weeks. Then she was at the base of the shell with her satchel, and she climbed. He had been waiting the way he waits, without urgency, without showing concern, but with the whole of his attention turned toward an outcome he had decided mattered. She came in. She sat in the chair, the one across from me now, the empty one, the cushion still holding her shape. She did not pour tea. He waited. She said, "I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" he said. She said, "You're going to tell me I chose who paid, that I stood outside and didn't go back in, that I knew and did it anyway. And that what I did and what those men do in those rooms is harder to tell apart than I'd like. He waited. She said, "You're right. I've known you were right since before I started." And then, he said. She was quiet a long while. Then, "I have heard them my whole life. In every market, every village, every room I have ever walked into. I hear what people want underneath. And it isn't evil, most of it. It's frightened and small and so familiar it breaks my heart. I have never once hated them for it, but they do such damage in the service of those small, frightened wants. Such enormous damage, so sure the whole time that they are doing the right thing. I thought if they could only see it, if for 6 hours they could see themselves the way I am forced to see them, feel the gap between what they want and what they do, feel what that gap costs the people standing closest to them, maybe the damage would be smaller. Maybe the wanting would come out cleaner on the other side. And I was right about some of them. The town is still standing. I did the arithmetic, and the arithmetic was correct. And he said, she looked at her hands. And I felt nothing when I walked away. Not pride, not guilt, not even the ordinary tiredness of a hard choice made. I felt the way I feel after I've tended a difficult plant correctly, as though I had done a piece of skilled work well. She said, "That frightens me more than anything I have ever heard in anyone else." He told her then the thing he had been turning over since the feast, that the nothing she felt, the missing weight where the guilt or the pride should have been, was not evil arriving in a good soul. It was what happens when a gift that works at the level of seeing the truth is used long enough and completely enough that the one using it starts to handle the weight of right and wrong the way the gift handles everything else, as information, clean, frictionless. She had been hearing true intent since she was 3. She had been right about it every time for 20 years. And the part of a person that hesitates before acting on what they see, the part that holds back because it is not entirely sure it is right, that part only works if there is some doubt left to run it. She had run out of doubt. She looked at him for a long, long time. Then she said, "When I was 7, that morning in the lower fields, when you let me sleep in the sun and I lay with my ear against your shell, I heard you." He went very still, the kind of still that mountains are. She said, "I have never told you what I heard. In all these years, I have never once said it." He waited. She said, "And I am not going to tell you now either." She stood. She crossed to the garden wall and stood with her back to him, looking at the screaming flower, the oldest one, the first, for a long time. Then she went to the door, took her satchel from the hook, and checked it in the quiet, methodical way she always checked it before a journey, as though this were a supply run and nothing more. She said, "Tend it. Some of them deserve to see themselves, not all of them. You'll know the difference. You always did." As she opened the door, she did not look back. He watched her cross the shell in the first grey of morning, clear sky that day, the valley still dark below, and climb down at the western edge and vanish into the fern. He told me she moved, in those last minutes, with the perfect ease of someone who has finally decided what she is for, and has nowhere left in her to hesitate. And he has been wondering, every day for 11 years, whether what she heard from him at 7 was something so terrible it killed her faith in goodness for good, or something so pure it convinced her she could never deserve to stay, or whether she heard nothing at all, and only said she had, because she needed one weapon he could never argue against, and she knew his own heart was the single thing he could neither explain to her nor disprove. He told me all three keep him awake. On the rare nights anything can. He told me he still has not decided which one he hopes is true. I want to tell you what is in the markets now. It is the saddest part, and the smallest, and the one I think about most. In the lowland towns, at the herbalist stalls, you can buy little blue packets they call ancestral tea. It works somewhat. You dream more vividly. You feel a warmth in a grandmother's hands you didn't expect. It is not nothing. In the highland villages, the hunters' suppliers sell a deep red root they call the edge. About half strength. It sharpens you for 6 hours. The sellers always mention the first 2 hours can be strange. They don't know why. They only know it passes. The people selling these things did not make them. They found seeds after she left and grew them in ordinary soil and sold what came up. 3rd generation. 4th, the knowledge of what makes the real thing real, the soil, the dark, the intent of the hands that tend it, went with her. The world kept the shape of what she built, not the thing itself. Everything in the markets now is half of what it was, and no one alive remembers the other half. He tends the true garden still, carefully, the way she taught him. He grows the real ones in the quantities she would have allowed. He does not give them to anyone. He does not know who she would have chosen now without her listening, and he does not trust himself to choose alone. The long list of waiting people went with her. The garden grows. The plants bloom in the dark. The screaming flower screams silently, tenderly, the way it has for 30 years. And he has tended all of it for 11 years, awake only rarely, waiting for something he will not let himself name too clearly. I stop talking. The dome is very dark now. The sunset that filled it when I sat down is hours gone. Outside the glass, the valley is a black sea. The far canopies only a suggestion, and the only light left in the whole world is the lantern over the table, burning its steady amber, and the faint answering glow of a few of the stranger plants. A pod here, a bloom there that hold a little light of their own. The tea is cold. The small shapes in it have gone still. I have not been drinking it for some time. Above me, out beyond the top of the dome, the great head moves. I feel it more than hear it, the long, slow shift of something vast preparing to be still for a very long while. The warmth that has been coming down through the glass all night is slower now, deeper. The way a fire's heat goes deeper in the last minutes before it dies, as though the warmth, in leaving, becomes for one moment more entirely itself than it has been all night. And someone is listening to all of this. I can feel it, the way she could feel a warmth around a corner. Someone out there in the dark, on the other side of the glass that is not glass, lying still and letting an old voice carry them down. I cannot see you, but I know the shape of you, the way he knew the shape of her crying at the base of the shell. You came to rest. You stayed for the story. You are still here, even now, even as your eyes are closing. Stay, then. There is almost nothing left to carry. I take my chart out of the satchel at my feet and unfold it on the table, not to read it, but because holding it is a habit older than I can measure, and habits that old are less things you do than things you are. I find the long ridge that leads up here, and the margin beside it, where 3 seasons ago I wrote one word. Missing. I cross it out. I write a different word beside it. I am not going to tell you what it is. Some words need more road under them before they can be written large. But I will tell you it is not a sad word, and it is not an angry one, and it is the closest thing I have to an answer for a question he has been carrying for 11 years and cannot put down. I fold the chart. I put it away. Above me, the warmth gathers itself for the last time. I say, old friend. It moves just once, like a hand settling. I say, sleep well, I'll keep it. And the warmth withdraws, slowly, hugely, the way a tide goes out, up and away beyond the top of the dome, into the great body I have never fully seen. Outside the glass, the columns of his legs shift in the dark once, and then are still. The whole shell settles under me in one long, infinitely slow exhalation, and goes quiet, quieter than the dark valley, quieter than the windless night, the particular stillness of something very large that has decided at last to rest. I sit in it for a while. The screaming flower does not scream any louder in the dark. The toothed vine does not stir. The small shapes sleep in their pods. The lantern burns. And out beyond the black glass, somewhere in the fern below or 3 ridges over, or in the part of the map I have never been able to draw, she walks, or rests, or works at whatever she left to do. And I do not know which, and I do not know where, and I do not know what she heard with her ear against the shell when she was 7 years old. I know the town is still standing. I know the markets sell half of something that used to be whole. I know a blue flower opens in the dark here, in a garden tended by the oldest thing I have ever met, and who waited awake for me to come and take the weight of all of it off him before he did. I know the lantern burns. I close my eyes. The last thing I feel is the warmth of that small flame on my face, and the great sleeping stillness of him underneath me holding the whole glasshouse steady in the dark, and the old, familiar feeling I find only in places like this and nowhere else on the road. The feeling of being exactly where the chart has been bringing me the whole time. Somewhere, tonight, a lantern was burning. For me, for someone, it was the same lantern.